Hello, welcome to this webinar on humanoids. My name is Trenton, Birch, and I'm going to spend the next hour talking to you and taking you through humanoid integration, what humanoids are, how they work, the global potential, the market value, all kind of things to do with these incredible robots that are coming our way. They're very intersected with AI as well, so there'll be some discussions around that. But without further ado, let's get into it. Thank you for being here. This is a masterclass on humanoids, the future of work and building ethical futures. It is brought to you in partnership with Training Force and Cheeba Future School. Just a bit about Training Force. Training Force are a national skills provider. They've been going since 2003, a very long time, and they provide accredited training with the CETAs and the SAQA. So they've been going a long time. They also will cover lots of different industries. They cover manufacturing, construction, transport, logistics, mining, hospitality, as well as the business sector. And then they do customized on-site learning, practical training to align with operational requirements. And they're also a BE compliant partner that can help with skills development and strategies to enhance BE compliance and workforce empowerment initiatives. We've been working with Training Force for a long time, so we're very proud to be partnering with them on this escapade. In terms of what I do, I run Cheeba Future School. We are a plant medicine company that have evolved into AI. Just a bit about me. I've been lecturing futurism for over 5 years. I've been in the education space for 15, 16 years now, mainly in creative media education. So I understand a lot about tech. I'm not a data scientist. I'm not a computer scientist, just to make that clear. But I have had a fascination with technology for many, many years and have started to lecture for many years about it. So hopefully this will bring you some insight into humanoids. There's a humanoid generated version of me. It looks a bit angry. I tried to make it happy, but then it made it really cheesy. So that's just an example of what you can do on AI. So we're going to really unpack the future of work and building ethical futures. And I don't think we can have a conversation around AI or humanoids, especially in developing countries, when it comes to the ethics and the ways of integrating them in a positive way, so that we don't completely displace everybody and destroy our economies and destroy society. We'll unpack those and some of the ethical concerns as we get into this. Before we get into this, I want you to think for a second and take a moment to think of the future. Yeah, to think of what you envisage the future to be. You know, from flying cars to super slick buildings, all kinds of different digital technologies, and where that actually came from and why you have that perception. Okay, so the answer is Hollywood. Essentially, when you start to perceive and think about the future, the things that have been put into your mind come from the movies. Many kinds of different movies. I'm sure some of you remember these. Some of these I grew up on. Star Wars, obviously, being a massive one, CP3O. Everybody wanted one, even down to 1962, the cartoon series, the Jetsons had a robot, and obviously the Terminator. So on the one hand, you've got these really sort of aggressive, domineering forces of humanoids that can destroy us. On the other hand, you've got Robocop who protects us, and CP3O is our companion. So this is not a new thing. We've been looking at humanoids and visualizing and fantasizing about them for decades, but times have certainly changed. And I'll unpack exactly how fast this industry is moving, because it is quite dramatic, the pace that it is moving at. So let's just talk about what is a humanoid. Okay, so humanoid is a robot. Okay, it is an electronic robot, but it is made in the shape and the dimensions and dynamics of a human being. So it has arms, limbs, hands, feet, a head. And basically, we've designed humanoids to fit into a human-based world. So the stairs we have, whether it's getting into a car or sitting on a seat, these humanoids have been kind of replicated to fit into a world that was essentially designed and made for humans. And we know in terms of dexterity that we are one of the most dexterous sort of beings on the planet in terms of what we can do and the way we move, what we can build. So when you take that and you take the sort of the mind and the body, we are pretty powerful beings. So essentially, that is what a humanoid is. A humanoid, is a robot. Some of the robots we know about and talk about are things like this. This is a factory robots. These robots are very narrow in terms of AI. They only do specific tasks. They're very functional. In fact, most robots up until recently have been completely functional. But it's with the integration of AI and language models, which I'll unpack in a minute, it's starting to mean that robots have a lot more potential, or humanoids have a lot more potential. But this is an example of mass robots. So robots have been used industrially, for decades now. So robots are not a new thing, but the evolution into the humanoid has been moving at rapid speed. We can't talk about humanoids without talking about the rapid rise of AI. Have your head in the sand to not really know that AI is moving at warp speed. Depending on who you speak to and what other research I've been doing, there are two different train of thoughts. There's a 5-month doubling in terms of the speed of AI and its development. But then there are many people who say that it's a 3.3-month doubling. So it depends who you speak to. Obviously, the 3-month 3 is super optimistic. There is a lot of hype around AI at the moment. But I am a complete believer in the seismic impact it's going to have on us. So I think it's important that we factor this into the growth of humanoids. Times have really, really changed over the last 60 years. There was a concept called Moore's Law, which basically said that every 24 months, computing power doubled, transistors and microchips doubled, and every 2 years, the cost of computers halved. So this was something that we stuck by, and scientists stuck by for many, many, many years. If you look at the new kind of factor, so Moore's Law is now dead as a concept. The yellow line on the bottom is the pace of technology with Moore's Law. And then the dotted orange line is actually an example of what it's moving at if it's going at 5 months. So you can see the exponential growth. And then if we looked at the 3.5 months, then we're going to have that would even be steeper. Now, if we look at that and go, okay, so at that pace in 5 years, what is the exponential growth of AI? So if we talk about it in 5 months, in 5 years' time, AI will be 4,096 more times powerful than it is today. That already is a huge, huge amount, 4,000. However, if we cut that to 3.3 months, it will be 297,000 times more powerful. This is assuming that pace of change continues, but there seems to be no sign of it slowing down at the moment. So this is, the same as when you calculate interest; it just doubles and doubles and doubles. And I think the pace of AI and the way it is moving is absolutely integral to the pace of robotics. Why this topic matters, and this is just a few facts and figures that have come from some big research companies and big sort of financial companies. Morgan Stanley says by 2030 there will be just under 1 million robots in the system. 20 billion annual revenue. By 2040 they say 134 million, 1.2 trillion annual revenue, and then by 2050. 1 billion, 1.02 billion, about 4.7 trillion by 2050. So some other facts, Goldman Sachs say that selling humanoid robots will be 38 billion by 2035. So that's kind of in between the other numbers. ARK Invest say the resulting economic value of labor could be 24 trillion. And it's also important to understand that China have been really, really pushing the envelope with humanoid development. They put 20 billion into humanoid robots in the last year alone. And Beijing has just established a 1 trillion or $136 billion fund to support startups in areas like AI and robotics. The Chinese are making some big, big moves in the robotics and humanoid space. According to Forbes, 50% of the GDP is paying humans to do work every day. So this means that there's a large volume of money spent on human beings delivering tasks. Now, if we take a humanoid, and I'll unpack costs later, but let's just say a humanoid costs $30,000. Okay, so optimists, they say it's going to be between 20 and 30. Let's work on $30,000. Now, if we buy this on HP, and it depends if it's 3 or 5 years, but pretty much the same model that you would buy a car on, you're looking at probably about $10 a day, which is about $300 a month. Which is about 5,000 rand a month for those of you in South Africa, which is very affordable. The California, the minimum wage is $20 an hour. In South Africa, it's 28 rand an hour. So if you start to look at being able to pay 5,000-6,000 rand for a humanoid that works 24/7, that doesn't need drug testing, there's no drama, there's no sick days. it means that it's a really compelling offering in terms of the future of work. We have aging populations in places like Japan, where they don't have enough labor to do unskilled work on the ground. So, countries like that could be really, really beneficial in terms of humanoids. And then if you look at, developing economies, we have large amounts of unskilled labor. And we'll unpack some of those different areas where humanoids could potentially play a role in those areas as well. But the point is that this topic matters because there's also a growing demand, especially in certain countries, for labor. The other thing is just in terms of giving you a bit of scope in terms of the size that the Chinese are moving on this. So the World Humanoid Robot Games actually takes place for the first time in China this week. It's going to happen in the National Stadium and the National Speed Skating Oval, which is the picture on the bottom right there. So a really big, grandiose venue in Beijing. There will be 10 total events. 3 will be track events. They will be testing mobility. They will be testing team cooperation, as well as dexterity and skills of bin picking, simple assembly of like an IKEA chair. Not sure if they'll do the egg and spoon race, but they'll come up with all sort of crazy, wild and wonderful ideas. They'll also have basketball, table tennis, and badminton. And we think about this, and maybe it's a bit gimmicky, and some of you might have seen the sort of the ultimate fighting or boxing with the humanoids fighting each other. But the prize pool on this is $1.2 million. So there's a lot of money going into this. And they've recently, I think last week it was, in Beijing, they opened the first robotics high street store, which sells over 40 different types of robots. So these things are moving absolutely at speed. What's really important to also understand here is whether we believe in humanoids and AI is irrelevant. The world is moving this way, and we must embrace this as an African continent. Otherwise, we will simply get left behind. Africa has the world's youngest population. We have persistent challenges with healthcare, education, and skilled workers. So the integration of humanoids can be seen as something that could leapfrog us and really accelerate our growth as a continent. Obviously, the ethical transformation of that to making sure there isn't too much displacement is super important, but it's important that we must move. And I often get frustrated with the African dialogue. And for those of you who live in Africa, I know that it's a shared sentiment that we just cannot seem to pull our shit together, to be blunt, in terms of evolution and evolving. And I want to just quickly highlight a test case from China, who went from poverty to prosperity. In 1978, there were an estimated 260 million people living in poverty, according to the World Bank in China. And what China did was they created a strategy, a 5-year strategy. Well, actually, at that point, it was a long-term strategy. They focused on infrastructure investment. They built world-class transportation, and they focused a lot on industrialization. Obviously, we all know they became the world's factory, lifting millions of Chinese people out of poverty. And at one point, there was mass urbanization when they moved over 800 million people into cities. The point is they had a strategy and they had a plan. If you look at the Indians, they are also doing the same. India is growing massively tech-wise. There is simply no excuse for the African continent not to survive and thrive and move. But it takes a mentality and a seismic shift. And I think AI and humanoids can play a really important part in moving us forward rapidly rather than taking a huge amount of time because of the access we have to IP. Embodied AI. So when we use this word embodied AI for humanoids, or when AI becomes physical. So when it actually goes from your computer screen, I'm sure many of you have played with ChatGPT, had conversations with ChatGPT. Now all of a sudden this thing goes into something that's standing and moving in front of you and able to do something. We call that embodied AI. And it's really important to understand that the reason that humanoids are starting to move so rapidly forward is because of the rise of language models, like GPT-4, which got released a few days ago, Claude, Gemini, Grok, Manus, which is a big Chinese language model, DeepSeek, also a big Chinese language model. But these language models have allowed us to visualize a humanoid that actually can talk to us, that can interact with us, that can share knowledge with us. And that helps us integrate them in and make it realistic. There's also been a massive rise in hardware development from NVIDIA. Some of you may have seen they've just put a Project Digit out, which is a $3,000 supercomputer. It's about this big, sits on your desktop. They also moved from a CPU model to a GPU model, which is about parallel processing, which allowed speed of processing to take place. So, I think this has also encouraged a lot of humanoid robotics engineers and developers to move faster with the humanoid market, because language models are such an integral part of making sure that humanoids actually are functional and have value to society. My fascination in humanoids started as way back as 2013. Boston Dynamics, one of the leading robotics companies in the world, put out this one called Atlas, as well as these little dogs. Those are not humanoids, but they are, to replicate dogs, very dynamic, called Spot. They first put these out. They were basically hydraulic. So all sort of hydraulic systems, and you would have them falling over. I didn't actually notice at first, but in this picture, if you look in the background, there's actually two like lying flat on their face. Obviously, they're not active at the moment. But this was the first time that they really captured the imagination of what a humanoid could do. They had dance videos. These things were doing backflips and somersaults and jumping over tables and moving things. And for the first time, we could look at humanoids, and they actually started to become quite realistic. So from 2013 onwards, I've been fascinated and obsessed with watching Boston Dynamics. Obviously, there's a lot more players on the market. But in terms of the anatomy of a humanoid, there are a couple of things I want to highlight here. So degrees of freedom, DOF, okay, and that is basically describes how many joint movements there are. I'm going to unpack degrees of freedom completely separately in another slides, because it's quite important. The hands are super important. If we removed our hands from us as human beings, it would drastically reduce the amount of capability we had. The hands are said to be at least sort of 50% of the technical development that's gone into the hands, and I'll unpack those later. Then obviously we've got the senses. All kinds of different sensors to make sure that the humanoid can check its temperature, what the temperature of the environment is, can smell, to smell smoke, to smell food. There's LiDAR, which is basically how some humanoids find their way around. It's kind of like light technology through lasers. And then there's vision-based AI, which Tesla has pioneered through their driverless cars, where it's not based on sort of LiDAR. It's actually based on full visuals. And obviously Tesla have been testing cars for decades now, and have got a lot of data on visual-based AI. Then we've got MIUs, part of sensors, and those help with balance, orientation, and movement. And then tactile pads that we have in the fingers, and microphones. Then integration of language models we've talked about. And we get processing. So we get local processing and we get cloud processing. Obviously, we don't have enough GPU in the cranium of most humanoids. It's where most of the GPUs sit. Some of them are in different places, but the point is that you have a local GPU that has a certain amount of access to a certain amount of information, can obviously pick it up super fast. But if it needs to sync to the cloud to learn something else or to download some other information, and that will depend on your internet connection. But ultimately, you want these to be able to stand alone if the internet connection goes down, but then you're limited in terms of the capacity. Depending on where you were, you would load a local language model in terms of the language that you spoke, and local values and references, and we'll unpack that as we go through. The other thing is retrainable models. So we have a concept called the swarm concept, where multiple humanoids are in a space, and one humanoid learns one thing in terms of a task, and that through a swarm system goes into the other humanoids that are in that space. So learning, and we'll unpack how they learn, has become a lot quicker. And then, of course, there's the power situation. It's just like a human. We need to fuel ourselves. We need to recharge these things, and they last anything between 1 and 8 hours, depending on the brand. Let's just unpack degrees of freedom. So in robotics and biomechanics, degrees of freedom are described as the number of independent ways a joint or a system can move. So if we look at our elbow, we have one joint, that is 1 degree of freedom. If we look at a finger, we have 3 joints, 1, 2, 3. So that will be 3 degrees of freedom. They say that the human body has between 230 and 240 degrees of freedom. That obviously includes the hands, which has a very high amount, the face for facial features, and the spine. Okay, the hands alone have 27 degrees of freedom. So this is why it's so complicated to replicate those in humanoids, although we've come a very, very long way. The face has over 40. Most humanoids you see do not have expressive faces, although there are some that do. But this also causes like a huge amount of cost. So we try to keep the degrees of freedom as low as possible. But if we keep them too low, then we don't have the fluid motion and movement that we really want. We want to see these things moving and behaving and acting like us. And that's been the challenge. If you look at earlier humanoids, the way they walked was always a bit awkward, but they've got a lot better over the last few years. This is just a quick, unpacking of the stuff that, you've got vision, you've got positioning, just like our eardrums help us with gyroscopes. Our eardrums function for balance in a humanoid. It's a gyroscope. We need microphones and speakers. We need sensors, communication, pressures, electrics. They are quite deep in terms of what needs to happen. When you look at a human being and all the functions that we have, there are many, many different parts of a humanoid that need to replicate that to get the data and information they need. And this is just a breakdown of the hand. As I mentioned earlier, they reckon about 50% of the technology has gone into developing the hand. So these are very complex, and over the last few months have come very far. Some of you may have seen when Tesla first brought out its hand a few years ago, when it actually held an egg. So you've got one sensor on the top, you've got a sensor on the thumb, and then those sensors are relaying information to the computer to make sure that they don't crush the egg. So the technology that's gone into that to make sure that it can do basic tasks, that it can grasp with enough strength using cables or actuators. Actuators are essentially the muscle of the humanoid. So these are complex and complicated machines that they've made. And here's just some examples, and obviously it depends on the type of humanoid, these costs. But what I wanted to just highlight here was, that in terms of the percentage of what goes into each part of the humanoid, 17% is the hand. So yes, 50% went into the development of the hand, but in terms of the cost, 17% goes into the hand. The thigh and the calf is 13%, the feet are 12%. So this breaks down exactly each component and how much is needed to put into each one. Then we've got to talk about levels of autonomy. Okay, so this is one of the big things with AI as we move from AGI or toward AGI. We're not quite there yet. And then obviously into super intelligence. At the moment, we have lots of humanoids that are level 1 or level 0. And they're manually controlled with a remote, just kind of like you would get a PlayStation remote, or pre-programmed to do pre-moves. Then we get level 3 and 4. These are semi-autonomous. So they can work within dynamic spaces. That's currently where they're at. And they will only start to move to proper levels of 5 of full purpose once AGI kicks in. Artificial general intelligence. Some people say it's almost here. Some people say 2030. There are differing opinions. But ultimately, once AGI kicks in, then the levels of autonomy we can give humanoids will allow them to make decisions and act autonomously, without actually having to give them instructions or to give them verbal instructions. What's also really important to understand is how we train humanoids. So this is no different really than how we train language models. We train language models based on images. And to train language models has taken huge amounts of money, huge amounts of human time, where we've uploaded pictures of tigers or elephants or chickens. And the more we upload and the more we tell, the human being goes in there and says, yes, the chicken, no, this is not a chicken. Literally, this is how we built these data models. And the same thing happens with humanoids. So the top right hand there, you'll see different visualizations of somebody, or a human being actually putting rubbish in a dustbin, cooking on a stove. And those were used to simulate and to start helping teach humanoids and AI. On the bottom right there, we've got somebody standing with sensors. And then this actually, what has really sped humanoid development up, which has been super exciting in the last few years, is training in the virtual space. So we used to do it all manually. And then there's a thing called Isaac Labs, which is from NVIDIA, where we actually can train these data sets and all of the data that's needed in a virtual world, which just speeds up the opportunity in terms of training, because by training it manually is super slow. Some of the big market players around, there are lots of them at the moment. Of Tesla's Optimus is a big player. Agility Robots have Digit. Figure AI have been making some really rapid moves. Unitree also, and I'm going to showcase you some of these humanoids just to give you an idea of the dynamics. Boston Dynamics, as I've mentioned earlier, and we'll showcase Atlas. And then basically Engineered Arts. I'll take you through some of these as we go along. We are going to give away a course on this webinar, on this masterclass. So I'm just checking if we found a winner yet. Let me see from my team. We have a winner. So we are running AI courses, which we released a few weeks ago. Our first one takes place in a few weeks. And the winner of an AI course, it is online, so you can do it from anywhere in the world. It will take you into the world of AI, unpack exactly what AI is. We'll take you into language models, generative models, as well as agentic AI and bots. And the winner of that, congratulations, is Dudu Mglala. Dudu Mglala, well done. Thank you very much. We will be in touch. Right. So there's a website that I follow called Humanoids. I think it's just called Humanoids. This is just one screen grab. They have about 50 on there at the moment. You can see some of them don't have legs because obviously when you're creating sort of robotics, every element you add in costs money. So a lot of these are startups, but they come in all different shapes and sizes, and there are different iterations of them. So it's just a few examples of what they might look like. I wanted to showcase this because as much as when we look at these, they do look like robots from Star Trek, there is a big movement of people who are creating humanoids who are also trying to make them as realistic as possible. So putting sort of almost like skin grafting, and you'll see this is a mecha. She's from Engineered Arts. She actually has been given citizenship in Saudi Arabia. She was the first humanoid to be given citizenship. There were some arguments about whether that was a good or bad thing because Amira is a mecha, is a female, and there was talks about female having more freedom in Saudi Arabia than women there. But anyway, that's a different topic. But then if you look at the right, Jia was developed by the University of Science and Technology of China, and you can see Mecha there has a frown on her face because they have spent money and time in terms of degrees of freedom, adding expressions into her face. And, once this starts to happen and take place, then, we will enter a world where it might be difficult to tell the difference between a humanoid and a human. So those are just an idea of where it's actually going in terms of further down the line. Let's talk about the cost. So up until recently, Unitree's entry-level humanoid was about $16,900 until they released another one, which we'll unpack in a minute, for $5,900. It completely has blown the market wide open in terms of capabilities, in terms of cost. Obviously, they're trying to hit a big volume market. So I'll unpack exactly what that humanoid is in a minute. But that's a basic entry-level humanoid. As I mentioned earlier, Tesla's should be between 20 and 30,000. I mean, we say entry level, the Tesla Optimus should be pretty robust once it comes out. Then we're looking at mid-tier, where we're looking at 120,000 plus. Those are obviously super designed, and then anything from 200 plus. It's the same when you're buying a TV or a computer. You're looking for different degrees of tech, of mobility, of degrees of freedom. You benchmark depending on those, and depending on what you have, will very much dictate the cost of what you're going to pay. Right, let's take you through a few examples. This is an incredible humanoid in terms of its movement. So Unitree are a Chinese company making really big moves in the space. And I just want you to look at the fluidity of the movement, because when this came out, we were really blown away. So that is from Unitree. You can see doing obviously Tai Chi and Kung Fu moves, in true Chinese style. So very interesting to see the dexterity of that. Next, we're going to go, I'm just going to quickly show you, this was the first side flip that Unitree ever did, just showing the And then just taking it into the home space, because there's a lot of talk about how humanoids can be implemented into the workspace, but what about how they get implemented into the home space? So this is from Norway. It's called Neo, and you can see that they've dressed it in a tracksuit. If you look at the hands, you can see that the hands are mechanical, but they've sort of dressed it in a tracksuit, so it looks a bit more friendly, the kind of thing you might feel a bit more comfortable walking around your house. And this is So yeah, people are obviously trying to, you've got to understand that, when you're creating something, you're going to market the hell out of it. So, it could be argued that there's a lot of hype around this because, the pace might not be as fast as we think it could be. But the reality is, if we look at how fast this has come over the last 2 years, I think it's just without a doubt, going to be one of the most interesting times. This is one of my personal favorite in terms of movement, just in terms of this. These guys, as I showed you the earlier Atlas, this is the Atlas 2, but just look at the way this moves in terms of the way it walks and the fluidity of motion. Yeah, incredible dexterity there. The face is obviously quite unique. The spinning head also quite unique, but a huge opportunity for these guys. And then, and I must be slightly biased. My favorite, I just love the design of Optimus. So yeah, obviously lots of PR, lots of driving. Obviously with this, with Tesla being such a bold and brave and large company, they've got a lot of marketing clout behind this. But just in terms of the actual design, I think it's been amazingly designed and super feels friendly, if that's possible to describe it like that. But that's the thing, is we're not trying to make these things look scary. We want people to embrace and accept them. And just a quick example of the different degrees of freedom, and these change across different humanoids. If we look at Boston Dynamics, it has 29 degrees of freedom. Tesla has 28 degrees of freedom, and then the Unitree one has less. When we've got human batteries, and this is where Tesla really take it, because obviously they've been working on battery technology for their self-driving cars and for their electric cars for many years. So they say that there was the last 8 hours. Unitree is only 1 hour. Sorry, Boston Dynamics is 1 hour, and Unitree says 2 hours, although I have seen it say 1 hour as well. But where it completely has just blown my mind over the last few months is with the introduction of this guy, Unitree R1. This is $5,900, okay, which is about 80,000 Rand. Really affordable. And when it first came out, it looks a bit like a Power Ranger, so I was like, it's a bit gimmicky. It doesn't have hands, so it has stumps. You can buy add-on hands for that. But look at the dexterity of how this actually moves. So really hard to believe, for just under $6,000 that you can actually buy one of these. And, if you get the hands on it, and then you've got the language model, the dexterity and the movement of this is mind-blowing. This only has a 1 hour battery life. So that is a challenge. But, the point is that they're trying to bring these into the market. And it's like any early technology, the longer it's in the marketplace, the cheaper it will get. Let's talk about the future of work, because I know this is a big concern for people in AI and in humanoids. Let's not forget that the Industrial Revolution also created seismic change for the workforce. We went from digging trenches physically to creating machines. I think it's slightly different with AI and humanoids, because essentially, machines and Industrial Revolution took away a lot of physical jobs, whereas AI is going to take a lot of kind of what we call white-collar jobs, where people are working behind computers and dealing with processes. And the stats on AI are quite disturbing at times. But it's important to understand that we have lived through times like this before. But this is going to be, in my opinion, one of the most seismic changes in humanity since I think we discovered fire. Why do humanoids matter? Okay, why? It's important to understand why that we should take them seriously. So the first thing is that upskilling, okay, and giving support in certain areas. Okay, factory assistants, lab technicians, trainers, a lot of mundane jobs that human beings shouldn't really be doing. If we look at back in the Industrial Revolution, when many people, my parents and parents ended up on a supply chain where they were literally slaves, pushing buttons and doing the same repetitive task over and over again. And then all of a sudden, industrialization came along, and we had robots or systems where automation came in, and that made things a lot easier. The same thing will happen. There's a lot of mundane, boring stuff that we do in the workplace. if we can automate that through agentic AI and through humanoids, why shouldn't we do that to make life more fulfilling? We'll unpack that just now. Education, which I'm going to unpack as a completely separate thing, and then healthcare, helping elderly, companionship, mobility assistance. The idea for the first phase, for sure, is to amplify and not replace, to support. These things are fatigue-free. They're always learning. They're so dexterous in their thinking. So how do we integrate them without them replacing us? And in terms of education, I think why there's going to be so much disruption in the education space is because ultimately they are multilingual and multimodal. So they can teach in multiple languages. You can put them in the middle of a rural area. They have 24/7 access to content. They deliver personalized learning. And I'm not saying that we should be replacing teachers. I'm saying that they can complement and work with teachers. In Africa, in rural areas, we have a big challenge in clinics and in schools where we have teachers that are under sort of educated for what's needed. They're not on top of what's happening in the modern world. We have the same problem in clinics. We're understaffed. So if we could have humanoids into those particular fields, they would really, really help. By 2030, according to the World Health Organization, I think it was, we're going to need 44 million teachers just to deliver education. There's already a shortage of teachers. So this could really help in developing economies. And it might sound a bit far-fetched and a bit weird, but when you start to look at images like this, it becomes very real. And it's only a question of time before we integrate this. I was talking to somebody the other day, my brother the other day, who's based in the States. He was saying to me that he got into a driverless car for the first time. And he said the first time was quite strange and weird and a bit uncomfortable. He said the second time he got in, he didn't blink an eye. He was just completely used to it. So I think the adaptation and adoption of these humanoids into society is going to be quite rapid if we can prove the use case to improve lives. They can also do dangerous and mundane jobs. So whether it's working in search and rescue, security guards, working under the sea, working in nuclear stations, repetitive tasks. So Amazon, for example, not necessarily using humanoids, but using a lot of robotics to replace boring tasks that shouldn't really be done by humans, because it really is a waste of human kind. And then there's obviously the military operations. There's a big whole conversation around that. That is one of the most terrifying parts of AI and humanoids. Is giving AI and humanoids autonomy to decide whether to kill or not. Those are big ethical questions that are being asked at the moment, but something to keep in mind. But ultimately, humanoids can play a big role in the dangerous and mundane jobs. And then what we need to do is try and look at displacement versus creation. Okay, instead of displacing humans, how can we use this as new opportunities? And again, some facts. Goldman Sachs say that 300 million jobs could be displaced. 2/3 of those, they reckon, will be in the US and Europe, which are developed economies, will be exposed to some form of automation. The World Economic Forum says there'll be a net loss of 14 million jobs by 2027, which is 2 years away. They say 83 million jobs will be displaced, but 60 new million ones will be created, which is why it's important to upskill yourself on AI and new technologies as soon as possible. And then McKinsey and Company say that full job automation will be rare. That's their opinion. 60% of occupations could see at least 30% of their tasks automated. We're seeing this with agentic AI and bots and agents. So I think some of these figures are not beyond the wild imagination. And I'm demonstrating these because these are a lot of predictions based on lots of different inputs. But it's just important to see that some serious people putting some real brain power into trying to predict how this will move. So the idea is not to replace, it's to replace tasks and not people. And if we approach it from that will be the first phase. I am an eternal optimist as a human being, but I do believe that at some point, most work is going to be replaced by AI and humanoids. And that's a completely different conversation, which we'll unpack in a minute. So what is the new work paradigm? Okay. There's a whole thought of discussion around this, around AI, humanoids, being able to free us up from the mundane. There's talk already in the States about moving to a 4-day work week. I struggle conceptually to think of how we could have a 4-day work week in developing economies where we're just trying to build constantly. But there is discussions. They're testing it out in Japan, in Australia, and some Scandinavian countries. They're testing a 3-day work week in some places. The idea is to decrease the level of work without decreasing the level of income. So purpose-led work, so that we can actually, as human beings, move into this age of enlightenment where we can do things that give us purpose and meaning, as opposed to doing things just for a paycheck at the end of the month. It sounds great in principle. Whether it will work in certain economies or not, I'm not sure. I have mixed opinions on it. Also, to become human focused. So they say we can be creative, we can focus on caring for each other, on strategy and leadership, and focus on human beings rather than focus on these tasks the whole time. And these are some of the sort of mentalities and the psyches and the things that are being discussed at the moment. Jobs that are safest. Okay, so they reckon that some of the jobs that are safest are skills trades, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, roofers, tradesmen, which take a lot of energy, a lot of dexterity from humanoids, and also, the generally lower income level jobs. So would a humanoid make sense to climb on a roof? Healthcare professionals, they're already AI could be argued can do a better job than your doctor, just in terms of the access to information they have. So there's debates about that. And I think that, what the future is, again, is doctors working with AI. And again, that's the psychology of someone who studied, to be a doctor for 7 years, being told to sit there with his computer open and to check in with AI, to analyze blood results, to come up with different cross-referencing. I think there's going to be a seismic mental shift that's needed. But there's no doubt about it that as a tool, it can amplify and really help us. And then creative and strategic leadership, they say, will also be really important. Just understanding how to be strategic. And that's not to say that the AI is not strategic, because it is, but it doesn't necessarily understand the nuances of a business, the nuances of the environment that it's in yet. But these are some of the things that are safest at the moment. And then obviously there's new job creation. So if we have humanoids, we need service centers to service these humanoids. We need over-the-air updates. So we need people who can drive updated technology onto humanoids. We need training in diagnostics, how we function these things. There's a lot of stats around that there'll be, if you speak to or listen to people like Elon Musk, they reckon that everybody will have firstly an AI companion, which I think is an absolute given. And then many of us will have AI humanoid companions in our homes. There's no doubt about it as time moves on. So those are going to be big on demand for software development, for upkeep, and we're going to need mechanics who can deal with specialization, and that's just on the humanoid side. Obviously, there's data scientists and all the other stuff in the AI space, but there are opportunities for new jobs to be created, so we mustn't forget that. I think this is bringing us to the end. Ethics. We need to discuss ethics because this is a big challenge at the moment. There are, big tech companies moving forward at lightning speed. You may, if you are into the AI space, have seen a lot of people who have stepped out of these big corporate jobs who are now speaking about the danger of AI and that we need to really get a grip. For those of you who are a bit geeky or nerdy, I encourage you to check out a document called AI 2027, which is a 24-month projection on what could happen with AI. We're essentially in an arms race between the US and China. And if you look at the tech companies, like no one is slowing down. Everybody is moving at rapid speed. And this AI 2027 basically outlines how if we do not get on top of AI, that we have the choice of it wiping out humanity, which I think is a real possibility if we do not control it, and then as reining it back at the right point so that we don't lose control. So there are different schools of thoughts. I am, as I said, an eternal optimist. I really believe that AI and humanoids can help enhance our lives, but we do have to put the guardrails in place. There are guardrails in place already, whether you're using ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, all those. They already have guardrails. They also have values, which I'll unpack in a minute. But ethics is a very, very important conversation. Should humanoids have rights? So you saw Mecca has got rights in Saudi Arabia as a citizen. So should these creatures, robots, whatever you want to call them, actually have rights? Should they be able to vote? What are the safety protocols? Is there an off switch? Imagine you have a humanoid in your house and it's charging its battery for the evening. Do you unplug it? Do you have an off switch? Do you chain it with handcuffs so it can't come into your room on a night and smother you with a pillow? Who knows? These are real kind of concerns that we have to factor in. And then there's data protection. So you've got something walking and moving around your house that it can see every single part of your space. And literally anybody that has access to that can move and look at your house. So if you look at a factory, for example, that's doing something high tech, the military guys who are producing high tech weaponry, and they've got all these humanoids walking around. How do they ensure that the data is protected? That's a big, big challenge. And then resource management. Energy consumption is a big problem. I'll unpack that in a minute, but there's a lot of resources that are going into AI and humanoids. Bias and fairness. This is something that is really important. Who creates the values? So in Africa, we have values. We have lots of sort of tribal values, lots of deep, complex social dynamics. But the AI that we have at the moment is Chinese, American, European. The values, the guardrails, the constitutions, as some of them call it, are all put together by Western or international organizations. So those ultimately biases and fairnesses come into ours. And what we've got to be careful of is that we are not tech colonized. We've been religiously colonized. We've been culturally colonized. We've been economically colonized. How do we ensure as developing economies that we don't become tech colonized? Then there's transparency, explainability. There are issues with AI. There is hallucination. Some of you may have seen there was a humanoid which was tethered to something was holding, and all of a sudden it tried to attack the guys in the lab. How do we make sure that those don't happen? Privacy and surveillance, I just unpacked now. Job displacement, we've spoken about that in detail. And then control and accountability. So when something happens with your humanoid, who is ultimately accountable? And how much accountability is big tech taking? And then we've got energy and sustainability. We already have a global crisis in terms of these things. Massive energy consumption is needed for data centers. I read recently that AI, in inverted commas, I'm not sure which company it was, but have bought a power station. So the amount of energy being consumed for data centers is unbelievable. And the carbon footprint that data centers present. Recently in Uruguay, there was a data center that was going to be built in a rural village. They actually won a court case to overturn it because of the amount of water it was going to pull from the local area. So these are things, and then there's waste from hardware turnover. So these are things that we also need to factor in terms of sustainability. And then there's of course the geographic inequality of impact, not just geographically but class-wise. How do we make sure that AI and humanoids are democratized? That we don't have this massive gap. We already in developing economies, especially here in where I live in South Africa, have a massive disparity between rich and poor. Our middle class is being eroded. How do we make sure that the West moves forward at warp speed and we move forward too slowly because we don't put the energy in or don't have access, or the tech is not relevant to our environment? Then there's of course the psychological and cultural challenges. As I mentioned earlier, we have deep cultural history across this continent, lots of tribes. How do we make sure that we are effectively bringing AI into the mix that doesn't cause economic anxiety? There's already a lot of talk about job loss, about getting left behind. There's already this fear that is being driven by the AI industry. There's a lot of hype. I mean, I've been following AI for a long time. And over the last 6 to 8 months, I'm finding it quite overwhelming. Some of the tech updates. I mean, every single week every day there are tech updates, just at a crazy speed. And now that it's becoming democratized, and the thing to remember about AI is you don't need to be a data scientist, you don't need to be a computer scientist to understand how to use these applications. This is the beauty of it. The AI does it for you. So whether it's image generation, video generation, whether it's building or coding websites, the coders are dead. You do not need to code anymore. All of these tools are so dexterous and so quick that the ability to actually embrace them in your everyday life is also super important. The other thing to understand is that this is not just about using tech tools in the workplace. We can also use them to enhance our life. So in ChatGPT, for example, you can build your own GPT that you can build as your medical advisor, okay? And you prompt it properly, you tell it you're a Harvard graduate. In my case, I'm super into holistic medicine, so you're a Harvard graduate who's also studied holistic medicine, who doesn't believe in big pharma. I want you to take all of my blood tests and all of my 20, 30, 40 years of history, and I want you to unpack where you think I'm at health-wise. There are, obviously the most people are saying don't do it without your doctor, and I think we have to understand that AI is not perfect. It hallucinates, it makes mistakes. So, you've got to understand that you've also got to do your own research. But the reality is that you can create your own nutrition coach, you can create your own, advisor or counselor, and with the way and the pace things are moving at, apart from the business side, there's also a huge opportunity for these language models to also improve our lives, and culturally integrating them to sort of dispel the mistrust. It's very important that we try and do that. And I've talked about tech colonization before. We need localized design. I know there's a company in Botswana called Orion X who have done a local language model that has a whole lot of local African languages, which is really interesting because ultimately, I was with an Uber driver the other day who lived in one of the townships near me, and I said to him, I asked him if he knew about what ChatGPT was, and he didn't. And I said, if you sat in your room and you literally spoke to ChatGPT every day, you could learn anything you want, anything. You could learn about how to bake muffins, or you could learn how to be a rocket scientist. And that's the power. The challenges in African countries, especially in South Africa, is the cost of data. And big data in this country have completely throttled us. So that is a big challenge in terms of democratizing access. But the access is not unaffordable. $20 a month for ChatGPT is unaffordable to a lot, but is also affordable to a lot. So as data costs come down, that will also have a seismic impact. Right. We're coming to the end. What comes next? How are we going to co-live with these humanoids? How are the laws around them going to be? What are the rights, responsibilities? Are we going to have robot unions? There's talk of taxing robots so that we can basically put what's in place called UBI, which is Universal Basic Income. This is really, if you look at the way the world is moving at the moment, it's in a pretty dark, shocking space. We've got wars still taking place. We've got people starving. We've got all kinds of atrocities happening across the world. Is this an opportunity to change the world and change the way we think? I think it is. I think we have the ability to take AI, to accelerate our thinking, to question government's decisions, and to really help redesign society. But we do need a transition plan. Otherwise, we will fail. We need to upskill all kinds of things. We need funding mechanisms to make sure people can survive with dignity, and we need equitable distribution. And if you want to learn more about AI, as I said earlier, we've just given one of these courses away. And we have this course starting in a few weeks. It's AI Fluency for Humans. It's online. There's an opening special of $900, which is nothing. There are 4 classes, and you will go into understanding and unpacking of AI as a genre and what it is. And then you will dig into language models, into agentic AI, bots and agents, as well as generative AI. So it's a great course delivered by some great instructors. And so please have a look at that course if you want to learn more. And that's it. That brings us to the end of the masterclass. The future is human. I believe in humans with all my heart. I believe we have amazing qualities and that AI and humanoids could give us the potential and the opportunity to start living more fulfilling lives. Because I ask all of you now on this call, how many of you think your job sucks day to day? And that is not a life, you know. And as we become more enlightened as humans and realize that living purpose-driven existences is what's important, I think we can use and work and collaborate with AI as long as it's guarded, as long as the guardrails are in, to make the world a better place. And without further ado, that's it. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time. I hope you learned from this. The recording will be online, and we'll send that out in the next day or two. But really appreciate you being here. Please spread the word. Cheeba Future School Training Force coming together to bring on AI education for Africa. Goodbye.